Mornings in our house always moved too quickly. The coffee pot hissed, the microwave beeped, and the front door slammed twice before I had even found my keys. Sophie stood at the counter with her hair in a sleek ponytail, sliding containers into lunch bags as if she'd rehearsed the choreography. She was humming, a little off-key, but cheerful. My son Evan, already in a crisp suit, kissed her on the cheek before grabbing his briefcase. "You'll make it on time, Mom," Sophie asked without looking up. "I always do," I answered, though my hands shook as I rifled through my purse for the day's notes. 2 identical containers sat on the counter, one slightly larger than the other. Sophie handed me the smaller one, then leaned over to tuck the bigger box into Evan's leather bag. I murmured thanks, slipped mine into my tote, and hurried out the door. Traffic into Bellevue was the usual crawl, a sea of brake lights and horns. By the time I reached the office, my nerves had settled into their familiar rhythm phone calls, production updates, the endless string of decisions that kept my little perfume company alive. At noon, I carried my tote into the break room where 3 of the younger staff were gossiping over salads. "Mrs. Cole, join us," one of them said. I smiled, setting down my bag. When I pulled out the container, I noticed right away it was heavier than usual. The lid clicked open with resistance, and the scent of roasted chicken drifted up. I frowned. This wasn't mine. Sophie must have swapped them by accident. "Looks fancy," one of the girls teased. "Your daughter-in-law takes care of you." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "This is Evan's. Actually, she gave me the wrong one." As they leaned closer to peek, I noticed a faint dusting along the rim, tiny white grains clinging like frost. I brushed a finger over it and chuckled. What on earth sugar on the edge of a lunchbox? The room erupted with light laughter, but across the table, Paul Nguyen, our safety consultant, had gone rigid. Retired from medicine, he still carried himself like a man who saw danger before anyone else did. He reached for the container slowly, bringing it under the fluorescent light. His finger traced the same rim I had touched. The color drained from his face. His eyes, usually warm with patience, narrowed in alarm. "Marina," he said quietly, but firmly, "don't joke about this. Who packed this food?" "My daughter-in-law," I replied, confusion knotting in my chest. "She always cooks for Evan. Today, she just gave me the wrong box." He closed the lid with a snap, his hand trembling. Then he leaned forward, voice low but urgent. "Get your son to a hospital. Now." The laughter in the room died instantly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ribs. My throat went dry as I slid the container back into my tote, Paul's words echoing in my ears. I don't remember much of the drive to the hospital. My hands clutched the wheel so tightly the leather dug into my palms, and the lunch container sat sealed inside a plastic bag on the passenger seat like evidence in a crime I couldn't yet name. Paul's words had burrowed into my mind and refused to leave. "Get your son to a hospital. Now." At the ER desk, the young nurse blinked when I set the bag down. "Ma'am, this is for food service." "No," I said, sharper than I meant. "It needs testing. Someone I trust thinks it may be contaminated." Before she could dismiss me, Paul appeared, slightly out of breath. He must have driven straight after me, with the authority only a retired doctor could muster. He slid his credentials across the counter. "Run a toxicology panel. Tell Dr. Mitchell it's urgent. And lock the sample until he gets there." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Within minutes, the container disappeared into the back, and I was led to a waiting room with 2 bright lights and a television buzzing faintly about stock prices. My heart pounded as though it might break free from my chest. Paul sat beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. "We'll know soon." When Dr. Mitchell finally entered, his expression said more than his words. He sat across from me, folding his hands carefully as if bracing for the impact of what he had to deliver. "Mrs. Cole," he began. "The residue on the lid isn't sugar. It's arsenic." The air left my lungs. "Arsenic," he nodded, "in small doses over time. It weakens the body fatigue, abdominal pain, nausea. Long-term exposure can damage organs, higher concentrations." His voice trailed off. Images flashed in my mind. Evan rubbing his stomach after dinner, slumping on the couch claiming he was just tired from long meetings. Sophie setting plates with her ever-present smile. I had laughed it off, blamed stress, even scolded him to eat more vegetables. And all this time, "Has your son shown any of these symptoms, Dr. Mitchell asked. My voice cracked. "Yes, for months." Paul leaned forward. "We need him here immediately." I fumbled for my phone, typing with shaking fingers. "Evan, come to the hospital. Don't tell Sophie, it's important." The dots blinked, then vanished. Minutes passed before my phone buzzed with his reply. "Mom, what's going on?" "I'm in a meeting. Please, Evan." "Trust me." Another pause. Then finally, "Fine, I'll come, but you're worrying for nothing." When he arrived, still in his suit, confusion clouded his face. "What's this about?" "Why the secrecy?" I guided him into a private room. "Dr. Mitchell began asking questions about his symptoms. Evan admitted to the fatigue, the stomach aches, the strange bitter taste in drinks Sophie made him. Still, he forced a laugh. "Look, I've been working 80 hours a week. Of course I'm tired. Sophie's been the only reason I'm eating at all. She takes care of me." I wanted to shake him, to make him see. Instead, I gripped his hand. "They found arsenic in your food, Evan." "Arsenic? This isn't stress." His smile faltered, then hardened. "Mom, stop. Sophie loves me." "She would never," Paul interrupted gently, but firmly. "Mr. Cole, denial won't protect you. We have lab confirmation. If your exposure continues, your life is at risk." Evan pulled his hand from mine, pacing the small room. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape from words too heavy to hold. "You're wrong," he whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. I watched my son struggle between loyalty and survival, between the woman he vowed to trust and the truth sitting in front of him. My throat burned with the words I dreaded to speak, but knew I must. Evan's words echoed in the small hospital room long after he stopped speaking. "Sophie loves me. She would never hurt me." His voice cracked on the word never, and I could see the boy he once was hiding in the man who stood before me, now frightened, stubborn, unwilling to imagine betrayal. I wanted to argue, but my throat tightened. Sophie had been in my life for years, woven into our family's rhythm. She wasn't some stranger we barely knew. She was the woman who made Evan laugh after his father's funeral, who sat beside me in my kitchen learning the perfume notes I'd spent decades perfecting, who brought me tea when migraines left me weak. Could all of that have been false? The memory of their first visit surged forward unbidden. Evan had shown up one Sunday afternoon, grinning like he had won the lottery. Behind him stood Sophie, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes wide with nerves. "Mom?" he said, pulling her forward. "This is Sophie." "She's the one." I had raised an eyebrow, skeptical of his certainty. But she extended her hand with trembling sincerity. "Mrs. Cole, I promise you I'll always take care of him. He means everything to me." At the time, my heart had softened. She seemed genuine, her words awkward but heartfelt. That night I watched them laugh over pasta, Evan stealing bites from her plate. And I thought, maybe I don't have to worry anymore. Maybe she really will love him the way I have. Now, sitting across from my son, the promise twisted inside me. What if her vow had only been performance? What if I had been so desperate to see Evan happy that I ignored the edges of her ambition, the questions she asked about my business, the way her smile sometimes lingered when money came up. My chest tightened with guilt. To accuse Sophie felt like betraying my own judgment, admitting I had welcomed danger into our family. Yet to ignore the evidence would be to risk Evan's life. "Evan," I said softly, reaching for his arm. "You've been sick for months. You can't just explain this away. You've trusted her." "I know. I've trusted her too. But the food came from your lunchbox. The tests don't lie." He pulled back, shaking his head. "It's a mistake." "Mom, maybe it was contamination from the kitchen. Or a spill. Or something else. We can't just assume it was intentional." His insistence pierced me. He sounded so much like his father, practical, unwilling to see malice where loyalty was expected. But I knew better. I had run a company long enough to understand ambition, to recognize how greed cloaked itself in charm. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Could I really accuse Sophie, who called me mom, who kissed my cheek at Christmas, who tucked Ava into bed with bedtime stories? Maybe Paul was wrong. Maybe the lab had mishandled the sample. Maybe I was letting fear cloud reason. I rubbed my temples, exhausted. I don't want to believe it either. But what if we're wrong to dismiss it? What if next time you don't wake up? Evan's jaw tightened. He looked away, eyes fixed on the sterile wall. "I won't confront her without proof. If we accuse her and we're wrong, we'll destroy everything for nothing." His words sliced through me, both rational and naive. I could see the weight of his marriage pressing against the truth he didn't want to accept. My instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, but his heart clung to the woman he loved. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my voice steady, though my insides trembled. "Then we'll get proof. For you, for both of us." The determination in my words surprised even me, but it was the only path left. Sleep didn't come easily after the hospital. Evan's words circled in my head, colliding with the doctor's calm explanation about arsenic. By morning, I was raw, jittery, and desperate for clarity. Instead of going to the office, I drove downtown to the brick building where my attorney, Charles Graydon, had kept an office for over 20 years. He had guided me through my husband's estate, the early days of my company, even the purchase of our home. If anyone could steady me, it was him. He looked surprised when I walked in unannounced. "Marina," he said, rising from his desk. "No call, no appointment." "What's wrong?" I forced a thin smile. "I need to see my will, today." He gestured for me to sit, then pulled a thick folder from a locked drawer. The paper smelled faintly of ink and dust. My own handwriting scattered across the margins from revisions years ago. I had signed the latest draft 18 months back, thinking it tidy and fair. "Here," Charles said, flipping to the section on inheritance. "Your estate, including the company, real estate, you see, and investments, is to be divided equally between Evan and Sophie. If either passes before you, the surviving spouse inherits that share." The words swam before my eyes. I gripped the arm of the chair to steady myself. So if Evan dies before me, Sophie inherits everything that was meant for him, he nodded. "Matter of fact. Correct. Standard spousal rights. And in your case, you added a survivorship clause. If Evan predeceases you, his portion consolidates into hers." The room felt colder, smaller. My chest constricted as though invisible hands were pressing against my ribs. If Evan dies, Sophie gets it all. Charles must have seen my expression. "Has something happened?" I swallowed hard. "I just need to know what options I have." He leaned forward. "You can amend the will at any time. Reallocate assets. Set up trusts. Designate contingencies. Nothing is fixed until death." My instinct screamed to tell him everything: the powder on the container, the lab results, the way Evan's body had been weakening for months. But I hesitated. Without evidence beyond a toxicology report, accusing Sophie outright would risk shattering my son's life in ways I couldn't control. Instead, I said, if I wanted to remove survivorship rights, what would that take, Simple? He replied, a new draft, your signature, a witness. It can be done today if you want. The pen lay just inches from my hand. All I had to do was pick it up, sign my name, and Sophie's supposed motive would vanish. But my fingers froze. I could feel Evan's voice in my ear. Don't accuse her without proof. If I changed the will now, she would know. Sophie wasn't careless. She'd noticed the shift in paperwork, the sudden silence about her share. If she truly was guilty, she might strike faster. My hand trembled as I pushed the folder back toward Charles. Not yet. Just keep it updated. And don't tell anyone I was here. His brow furrowed. Marina, you're making me worry. I stood, forcing steadiness into my voice. It's just precaution, nothing more. But inside, I knew it was far more than that. It wasn't just the food in the container that frightened me now. It was the ink on those pages, the legal lines that bound our family together, and the way a single clause had turned love into motive. When I left the office, the sun glared harshly off the windshield of my car. I sat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, realizing the battle ahead would require more than suspicion. It would require evidence, patience, and a kind of courage I wasn't sure I still possessed. I drove straight from Charles Graydon's office to the police precinct, the will still etched in my mind like a ticking clock. Asking for the Major Crimes Division felt surreal, as if I were stepping into someone else's nightmare. But soon, a detective with tired eyes and a sharp gaze introduced herself as Rosa Alvarez. She led me into a small room with gray walls and a table that had seen better days. I told her everything. My voice trembled as I described the container, Paul's reaction, the lab results, and Evan's insistence that it was all a mistake. I even admitted my visit to the attorney and the survivorship clause that gave Sophie every reason to want my son gone. Rosa listened without interrupting, jotting notes in quick strokes. When I finally stopped, she leaned back and folded her arms. Mrs. Cole, I won't lie, this is serious, but you don't have direct proof that your daughter-in-law put anything in that food. All you have is the lab's confirmation of arsenic. Her calm skepticism stung, though I understood it. Are you saying I should just wait until he collapses? No, she replied firmly. I'm saying we need evidence that ties her to the act. Otherwise, any defense attorney will shred the case. You want to protect your son? Then we need to be smarter than she is. Her words settled into me like cold water. I nodded, though my hands were clenched on the table. This is what I propose, Rosa continued. We'll arrange for discrete cameras in your kitchen and dining area. Nothing obvious. We'll also need samples of every meal prepared for Evan in the coming days, collected and tested without Sophie knowing. If she's responsible, she'll keep doing it. That's how we build a case strong enough to stop her. The thought of letting Sophie near Evan's food again made my stomach twist. And if she notices Rosa's dark eyes locked with mine, don't confront her. Not yet. If you accuse her without proof, she could cover her tracks, or worse, let her think she's winning. That's how she'll slip. I felt a shiver run down my spine. To sit across from Sophie, to smile at her, to let her serve us while knowing what I suspected, it was almost unthinkable. But the alternative was leaving Evan defenseless. I'll do it, I whispered. Rosa nodded once, then slid a card across the table. I'll coordinate with a technical team. We'll be in touch tonight. Stay calm, keep your routine, and Mrs. Cole, don't eat anything unless you know it came from your own hands. By the time I left the precinct, the weight of what I had agreed to pressed on my chest like a stone. I drove home slowly, rehearsing the lie of normalcy I would need to wear like a mask. When I opened the door that evening, Sophie was in the living room with Ava, reading a picture book. She looked up, her face brightening. "Mom, you're home early." She stood and embraced me, the warmth of her arms wrapping around me as if nothing were wrong. I forced my muscles not to stiffen. Her perfume, a floral blend I had once taught her to mix, lingered as she pulled away. "I made soup tonight," she said lightly. "Evan's favorite." I smiled, the corners of my mouth heavy. "That sounds perfect," I answered, my voice steady though my heart raced. Behind my calm nod, I felt the trembling begin. I was stepping into a performance I hadn't chosen, one where the smallest crack in my mask could cost us everything. The little black box the tech installed sat tucked behind a ceramic herb pot on the top shelf, its tiny lens aimed at the stove and the narrow strip of counter where Sophie always plated our food. It looked innocent enough, an extra Bluetooth speaker, the technician had said with a shrug, but knowing it was there made the kitchen feel like a stage, and me, an actor in a play I had not written. I kept my routine like a metronome. I brewed coffee at precisely 6:30, folded the morning orders, checked labels and production samples, and pretended nothing in our house had shifted. Sophie moved through the kitchen with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times, onion half-sliced, carrot diced, aromatic herbs fished from the pot. She hummed under her breath, a tune I recognized from our old playlists. Ava sat at the table drawing clumsy suns with too many rays and asked the same question a dozen times about school projects. And Sophie answered as if life was a string of small, ordinary pleasures. Rosa had warned me to act normal, to behave as if the day held no portent. But normal had been redefined. Every clink of cutlery made me swallow. Every steam-wrung sigh seemed loaded. When Sophie ladled broth into a heavy, white pot, my hands remembered lessons from decades of workshop seasons: balance, patience. But the hands shaking were not mine alone. I watched the back of her head, the way her ponytail brushed her neck, and rehearsed the smile I would offer at the table. The feed came through the secure line to Rosa's team. They monitored from a van 2 blocks away. I didn't want to watch on their screen. Instead, I busied myself in the living room with Ava's homework, the television murmuring about a weather front, my eyes flicking to the kitchen door as if that glance could substitute for surveillance. Sophie moved closer to the pot, reached for a small glass jar she kept near the spice rack, and I felt the room tilt. She unscrewed the lid, pinched a tiny amount between her fingers, and so casual it looked like an instinct she let it fall into the simmering broth. The motion was slight, practiced. Then she wiped the rim of the pot with the hem of her sleeve, as if erasing a fingerprint. I felt my stomach drop and my lungs brace as though for an impact. For a moment, I thought I had misread, that the grain had been salt or a harmless herb. But memory and the hospital's sterile words converged. Arsenic could be as fine and pale as sugar, invisible to people who trusted the hands that fed them. I rose before I knew I had moved, my chair scraping the floor, ready to march into the kitchen and demand an explanation. The urge to fling open the door and confront her with everything: Paul's voice, the lab results. My son's pallor burned hot and animal. I could hear Rosa's voice in my head. Don't confront her. Evidence first. The text call came through my phone, barely above a whisper. "One more day," he said. "We need a pattern. We need a..." And yet, I could see the movement again in my mind, the tiniest white arc falling. The rim wiped clean, the practiced calm of someone who had done a thing she hoped no one would ever notice. The camera had recorded it all. Rosa had it. I tried to think strategically how to use that recording without tipping off a woman who could be dangerous, while my heart hammered like a warning drum. Dinner that night felt like a ceremony. Sophie set the table with the same poise as always, as if we were not actors in a scheme with high stakes. I took my seat across from her, Ava between us. And when Sophie passed the bowl toward Evan, I held my breath and prepared to play my part until the moment to pull the curtain came. The plan needed one more push and opening that would make the motive visible to any jury, and, for the first time, leave Sophie no place to hide. The table was set simply roast chicken, green beans with almonds, and the broth Sophie had worked over so carefully. Evan walked in late, loosening his tie, and Sophie greeted him with a kiss on the cheek that seemed as warm as any wife's devotion. I forced myself to smile and poured water into Ava's cup. The weight of the camera hidden in the corner pressed on me, though no one else seemed to notice. I cut a piece of chicken and let the silence stretch just long enough before speaking. I met with Mr. Graydon today, I said, keeping my tone casual, as though I were remarking on the weather. Evan looked up. The attorney, yes, we talked about updating some documents. I speared a green bean, holding my fork steady though my pulse raced. I've decided that when the time comes, I want at least 80% of my estate to go toward a literacy foundation. There are children in this country who can't even read the signs on their own streets. It feels right to do something lasting. The effect was immediate. Sophie's smile froze mid-gesture. The hand holding her glass tightened until I thought it might shatter. For the briefest moment, her eyes flicked toward Evan, then toward me, and I saw the calculation there. She recovered quickly, raising her glass in a half-toast. That's a noble cause. Marina, truly. Her voice was syrupy, but the tension around her mouth betrayed her. Evan nodded, unaware of the storm beneath the words. That's generous. Mom, you've always believed in education. I pressed a napkin to my lips to hide the tremor. Yes. Well, I want to make sure the resources go where they're most needed. Property, shares, all of it can be redirected for the foundation. Sophie swallowed hard and set down her glass a little too firmly. Of course, it's your choice, she said. The words clipped. But maybe you should think about family first. Isn't that what most people do? Her tone was light, almost joking, but I heard the sharp edge underneath. Evan only chuckled. Family has done just fine. Sophie, Mom's earned the right to decide. The rest of dinner carried on with shallow conversation. Ava chattered about a school play. Evan asked about perfume shipments, and Sophie smiled at all the right places. But her laughter was brittle, and her eyes rarely left her plate. Later that night, after dishes were washed and the house grew quiet, I sat in the study pretending to balance accounts. My phone buzzed with a silent notification from Rose's team. The message was short. You'll want to see this. I waited until I was alone, then opened the feed. The camera in the hallway outside Sophie and Evan's room had caught her stepping out onto the porch, with her phone pressed close to her lips. The audio was faint, but the words carried clear enough through the static. We can't wait a month, she whispered fiercely. She's changing everything. If she signs, it's gone. Do you hear me? All of it. We have to act before she rewrites the will. Her voice shook with urgency, a mixture of fear and fury. She paused, listening, then nodded to the unseen person on the line. Yes, I'll handle it, but it has to be soon. The feed ended, leaving me staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding in my ears. The mask had cracked, and beneath it was something I had prayed I would never hear. I locked my phone and folded my trembling hands in my lap. The trap was tightening, and Sophie knew it. The question now was not if she would act, but when. The next morning, I found Evan sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee untouched, his tie draped loosely around his neck. The light from the window carved deep shadows across his face, and for the first time, he looked less like the confident executive he was, and more like the boy I once nursed through fevers and heartbreak. Mom, he said quietly, as if the word itself cost him something. "We need to talk." I sat down across from him, careful not to let my chair scrape the tile. My chest tightened as he rubbed his temples, eyes fixed on the mug in front of him. "I didn't sleep," he admitted. "Your words about Sophie kept spinning in my head, and then I started thinking back." His throat worked, and he exhaled slowly. "There were signs, weren't there? Things I brushed aside." My heart raced. "What signs?" "Evan." He lifted his gaze, and the pain in his eyes nearly undid me. The exhaustion I kept complaining about, I thought it was the hours at work. But it wasn't normal. I'd sit in meetings and feel like the room was tilting. I blamed stress, but it felt deeper, heavier. He tapped the table with one finger. Each beat a memory. The stomach cramps. The bitter taste in the orange juice she insisted I drink every morning. Sometimes I'd swear the soup tasted metallic. But when I mentioned it, Sophie would laugh, kiss my forehead, and say I was being dramatic. I wanted to believe her. He looked away, his jaw tightening. God, Mom. I wanted to believe her so badly. I reached across and covered his hand with mine. It was cold, trembling slightly. "You loved her, Evan. That's not a crime. Love makes us blind sometimes. But you're seeing now, that's what matters." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Do you know what hurts the most? I ignored you. All those times you told me to slow down, to get checked." I brushed it off. Because admitting you might be right meant admitting Sophie wasn't who I thought she was. And I couldn't handle that. His voice cracked, and he pressed his palms over his eyes. I slid my chair closer and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me like he hadn't done since he was a boy, his body shaking with the quiet sobs he tried to suppress. "I loved her, Mom. Part of me still does, but now I can't tell if what I feel is love or just the ghost of what I wanted love to be." I closed my eyes, my own tears threatening. "Evan, you don't have to figure that out today. What you need is to stay alive. That's the only thing that matters now." When his breathing steadied, I told him about Rosa's plan, the hidden cameras, the tests, the strategy to catch Sophie in the act without tipping her off. At first, he stiffened, as though the idea of deceiving his wife was one betrayal too many. But then his shoulders sagged, and he nodded slowly. "She's already betrayed me, hasn't she?" His words were flat, hollow. "If what you say is true, and God, the signs all line up, then I can't keep pretending. I'll help Rosa. I'll do whatever it takes." The relief that washed through me was sharp, almost painful. For weeks I had carried this alone, doubting myself, wondering if I was paranoid. Now my son was with me, yet the victory felt hollow, because his agreement meant accepting a truth that tore at his heart. I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "We'll get through this together. You're not alone in it, Evan. Not ever." He pressed his forehead against mine, and for a moment, the kitchen felt suspended in silence, just mother and son against the world. Then he pulled back, eyes red but steady. "Tell Rosa I'm in," he said. "Let's end this before she ends me." And as he rose from the table, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers, I felt the bitter sting of relief. My son believed me, but it meant the life he knew was already crumbling. The plan weighed on me all day like a stone lodged in my chest. Rosa had rehearsed every step with us. Evan would play the part of the dutiful husband eating his wife's dinner, then collapse after the first sip of wine. I would make the frantic call to 911 following the script she had given me. The EMTs would arrive, officers in disguise, ready to whisk Evan to safety. And Sophie? Sophie would believe she had won. I set the table myself, arranging each place setting with deliberate care. The roast chicken glistened under the kitchen lights, and Sophie had prepared a sauce that smelled faintly sweet, too sweet. I kept my hands steady as I carried the dishes out, though inside I was trembling. Evan arrived late, loosening his tie, and kissed Sophie on the cheek before sliding into his chair. The air felt heavy, thick with the tension of unspoken truths. Sophie chatted lightly about Ava's school project, her laughter ringing just a note too sharp. I smiled, nodded, let her words wash over me without response. My eyes were fixed on Evan. He lifted his glass, swirling the red wine Sophie had poured with such care. He gave me the briefest glance, a silent cue, and then took a small sip. A beat later, he set the glass down with exaggerated care, his hand wavering as though suddenly weak. Evan, Sophie asked, tilting her head with practiced concern. He pressed a hand to his stomach, his face draining of color. I don't feel so. His voice faltered, and then he slid from his chair, collapsing onto the floor with a groan that reverberated through me. I sprang up, my heart pounding not from surprise but from the sheer weight of the act. Oh God! Evan! My voice cracked as I knelt beside him, clutching his shoulder. His eyes fluttered closed, his breathing shallow but steady enough for me to know he was faking. I grabbed my phone, dialing with hands that shook in rhythm with my words. Please! I cried into the receiver. Though I knew Rosa was on the other end, my son collapsed. He's not breathing right. Hurry. We need help now. The room echoed with Sophie's wail. She dropped to her knees, pressing her hands to her face, but when she lowered them, I saw it, the glimmer, faint but unmistakable, of relief in her eyes. Not horror, not fear, relief, as though the world had finally tilted in her favor. She cradled Evan's head, stroking his hair with trembling fingers. No, no, my love, don't leave me, she sobbed. The words hollow, rehearsed, and yet the corners of her lips twitched as though a smile fought to break through. Moments later, the siren wailed in the distance, closer, closer, until it filled the night air. 2 EMTs burst through the door, uniforms crisp, their movements brisk and efficient. To Sophie, they were rescuers. To me, they were Rosa's men. They lifted Evan onto a stretcher, checking his pulse and attaching monitors as if their urgency might save him. I clutched his hand until the last possible moment, whispering, "Stay with me," before letting go. "I'll ride with him," I said firmly, stepping into the path before Sophie could speak. Sophie's eyes widened. She hesitated, then nodded, her hands twisting together. "Of course. Tell me what happens." Her voice cracked again, but her gaze slid toward the floor, and I saw it, the shadow of triumph, flickering across her face. The EMTs loaded Evan into the ambulance, and I climbed in after him. As the doors slammed shut and the vehicle lurched forward, I glanced back through the small window. Sophie stood in the doorway, her figure framed by the glow of the porch light. She wasn't devastated. She wasn't broken. She was stunned, calculating, already rewriting the future in her mind. And I knew Rosa was right. The truth would spill once Sophie believed she had already won. The hospital room hummed with machines, each beep and whir calculated to create the illusion of catastrophe. Evan lay motionless on the bed, wires snaking from his chest to the monitor. A green line jittered once, then sank flat. The shrill note of the flat line cutting through the air. My hands clamped over my ears before I remembered it wasn't real. It was theater. Every detail rehearsed. But it felt like I was watching my son slip away. The nurse really. Rosa's contact adjusted the electrodes, her face set in grim concentration. "We'll keep the simulation steady for the next hour," she said softly. Enough time for her to believe it. I nodded, though my throat was too tight to form words. My knees felt unsteady beneath me, and I sank into the chair beside Evan's bed. His skin was pale under the faint wash of makeup, and even knowing he was faking, I longed to shake him awake, to hear his voice steady me. My phone was heavy in my lap. Rosa had told me this part was mine to carry out. She'll never confess unless she believes she's won. I unlocked the screen, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely type. Each letter felt like a betrayal. He didn't make it. I stared at the words until they blurred through my tears. Pressing send was like shoving my own child into the grave. For a long moment, nothing happened. The flat line continued its endless scream, filling the sterile room. I buried my face in my hands, my body shaking. Was this cruelty worth it? To let Sophie believe her husband was gone? To let my son lie there pretending death while I lived the anguish in real time? The plan was sound, but my heart felt carved raw. The phone buzzed. I forced my eyes open and saw her reply. "No puede ser." "Are you sure?" Another message came seconds later, this one without hesitation. "When can we talk about the estate?" My stomach clenched so violently I had to grip the arm of the chair to stay upright. Not a word about love, not a single plea for confirmation or detail. Just business. Just money. I lifted my gaze to Evan. His chest rose faintly, a careful performance of shallow, failing breaths. The man lying there had once sworn vows to a woman who promised to cherish him forever. Now she counted his death as a doorway to riches. The door opened and Rosa slipped in, her face stern but her eyes searching mine. I held out the phone without speaking. She read the message, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This is it," she murmured. "This is the thread we needed. Now we pull." I looked back at Evan's still form, the monitor still crying out in its cruel performance. My heart twisted with the urge to rip off the wires and tell him we were done, that he could open his eyes and breathe free again. But Rosa's hand on my shoulder held me steady. "She'll reveal more," Rosa said quietly. "You've done the hardest part." I wiped my face with the back of my hand and drew a shaky breath. Sophie thought she had already won, and that belief would loosen her tongue. Now we only had to listen. The hallway outside Evan's hospital room echoed with hurried footsteps before the door burst open. Sophie stumbled inside, her hair disheveled. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in dramatic rivers. Her sobs were loud, too loud, bouncing against the sterile walls like rehearsed lines meant for an audience. She clutched her handbag to her chest, gasping between words. Where is he?" she cried, her eyes darting to the bed. The monitor still showed a flat line, the steady scream of the machine unbroken. I stood near the corner, my arms wrapped around myself, forcing my body to stay upright. Every instinct in me wanted to lunge at her, to demand answers, to shake her until the mask cracked wide open. But Rosa's instructions rang in my ears. "Let her speak. Let her believe." Sophie staggered forward, her sobs subsiding into smaller, pitiful sounds. She dropped her bag onto the chair and approached Evan's still form. Her fingers brushed his hand, lingering there. But there was no tenderness in her touch. It was probing, confirming. Her eyes, though glistening with tears, were sharp, scanning his face for movement. "Evan," she whispered, her voice low, trembling. "Oh, my love." She let out another sob, then leaned closer until her lips nearly brushed his ear. Her next words slid out like venom disguised as honey. "It's finally over." The air in the room seemed to stop. My stomach clenched as if struck, bile rising in my throat. Even knowing this was what we needed. Hearing it spoken out loud, the confirmation, the cruelty was almost unbearable. Rosa's team had hidden the mic under the bed frame, and I knew every syllable was being captured. Still, I wanted to scream, to claw the words out of existence. Sophie lingered there, her cheek pressed against Evan's hair as if she were grieving. "We'll be okay now," she murmured. "I'll take care of everything. The house, the company. No one will stop me." My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the chair to steady myself. She had no idea the room was listening. No idea that her whispered confession was sealing her fate. Then, with a suddenness that shattered the stillness, Evan's eyes opened. His hand twitched beneath hers. Sophie jerked back, her face draining of color. "No," she gasped, stumbling a step away. A step? No, that's Evan sat up, pulling the wires from his chest. The flatline replaced with a steady artificial beep as Rosa's contact adjusted the monitor. His eyes locked onto hers. Cold and unflinching. Over, he repeated, his voice low, shaking with fury. Sophie screamed. The sound pierced through me, sharp and wild. Nothing like the staged sobs she'd offered seconds before. She backed into the wall, her palms spread against the cold plaster as though searching for escape. I stepped forward, my own body trembling, but my voice steady. "We heard you, Sophie, every word." Her chest rose and fell in frantic bursts. No, you don't understand," she stammered. I was grieving. I didn't mean don't." Evan cut her off. His voice was broken, but his glare was steel. "Don't you dare twist this into something else. You wished me dead. You planned it. You whispered it like a prayer over my body." Her eyes darted from him to me, searching for softness, for doubt. But there was none left to give. Behind me, the door opened, and Rosa stepped in with 2 officers in plain clothes. Their presence filled the room. Silent, but undeniable. Sophie's mouth opened as if to scream again, but only a strangled sound came out. I stood beside Evan, my hand resting on his arm, feeling the tremor beneath his skin. This was the moment we had fought for. The truth breaking free from the shadows where it had festered. Sophie was cornered. Her own words wrapping tighter around her than any set of handcuffs could. And yet, watching her crumble, I felt no victory, only the crushing weight of betrayal. The knowledge that the woman I had welcomed as a daughter had been willing to destroy us both. Evan's gaze never wavered as Rosa moved closer, her voice sharp, commanding. "Sophie Cole, you're under arrest for attempted murder." Sophie's knees buckled, and she slid to the floor, her sobs breaking into incoherent pleas. But nothing she said could erase what we had heard, what she had whispered when she thought she had already won. Evan's hand gripped mine tighter as the officers stepped forward, and as they pulled Sophie to her feet, I knew this was only the beginning of the reckoning. The small interrogation room smelled faintly of disinfectant, its metal table gleaming under a single fluorescent light. Evan and I sat behind the one-way glass, Rosa standing at the table across from Sophie. My son's hand clenched mine so tightly that my fingers ached. But I welcomed the pain it anchored me in the moment. Sophie looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her blouse was wrinkled, mascara smudged from her tears. Though whether they were real or another act, I could no longer tell. She stared at the tabletop, her knuckles white where her hands gripped the edge. Rosa's voice broke the silence, calm but sharp. "Mrs. Cole, we have evidence. You can save yourself the performance. It won't change what we already know." Sophie lifted her chin, her expression twisting into something between defiance and desperation. "Evidence of what? Of me cooking for my husband, of me caring for this family while you all conspire against me without a word." Rosa slid a tablet across the table. She tapped the screen, and the feed from the kitchen camera flickered to life. There was Sophie, cheerful in her apron, stirring broth. Then the image zoomed as she tilted a small glass vial and tapped out a stream of fine white powder into the simmering pot. She wiped the rim of the ladle, humming as if it were nothing more than salt. Sophie's face drained of color, but she forced a laugh that scraped against the silence. that those were supplements. Natural vitamins. Evan's always exhausted. I just wanted him to feel stronger. You're twisting it. Rosa didn't blink. Vitamins don't register as arsenic on toxicology reports. She opened a folder and slid the lab results across the table. These tests show repeated doses at levels consistent with chronic poisoning. That's not care. Mrs. Cole, that's attempted murder. Sophie's breathing quickened, her eyes darting toward the glass as if she knew we were watching. No, you don't understand. Evan needed help. Doctors don't listen anymore. I was trying to help him the only way I knew how. Rosa leaned forward, her voice even colder. You weren't helping him. You were killing him slowly. And if the dosage in the last batch had reached him, you would have succeeded. Sophie's lips trembled, but she still clung to her performance. It's a mistake. Lab contamination. Something anything but that. I loved him. Rosa let the silence drag until Sophie's own words began to falter in the air. Then, with a flick of her hand, she pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. Sophie's voice filled the room, distorted slightly by static, but unmistakably hers. We can't wait a month. She's changing everything. If she signs, it's gone, all of it. We have to act before she rewrites the will. The sound of her own whisper made Sophie freeze. She stared at the recorder as though it had grown teeth. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and the mask she had worn so tightly began to crack. On the other side of the glass, Evan's grip on my hand broke, and he buried his face in his palms. His breath came in ragged bursts, a man trying to reconcile the woman he once loved with the voice plotting his death. I pressed my other hand against the glass, fighting the urge to storm into the room. Rosa's steady voice carried through the speakers, relentless and final. So tell me, Mrs. Cole, what mask do you wear now, when every lie has been stripped away? Sophie didn't answer. She simply stared at the recorder, silent, as the weight of her own words filled the room. Rosa spread another set of papers across the table. Her tone clipped. The lab ran extended panels. We tested not only the meals, but household items, 2 supplements, teas, tinctures. Mrs. Cole, you should see this. My eyes scanned the page, and at first, the words blurred together. Then I saw it, arsenic traces. Detected not only in Evan's food, but in the small bottle of herbal drops I took every morning for my nerves. Drops I'd trusted for years, comfort in a glass of water at the start of each day. My hand shot to my throat, as if I could claw away the weight pressing there. No, I whispered. That's mine. She's been giving that to me. 2. Rosa's silence was answer enough. Evan swore under his breath, pushing back from the table so abruptly the chair legs screeched across the floor. His face was pale, his chest heaving. She wasn't just after me, he said, voice breaking. She wanted you gone too, all this time, and I let her in. I brought her to you, Mom. I trusted her. His fists slammed onto the table. I put you in her hands. His grief was sharper than my own shock. He paced the narrow room, pulling at his hair, muttering fragments I should have seen it, should have protected you, until finally he dropped to his knees beside my chair. His hands gripped mine with desperate force. This is my fault. I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. His eyes brimmed with tears, raw with guilt that no son should carry. Listen to me. Evan, you didn't fail. She did. This was never your fault. He shook his head, but I pulled him into my arms, holding him against me as I had when he was a child waking from nightmares. His body trembled, and my blouse dampened with his tears. I stroked the back of his head, my own eyes burning. She deceived us both. I whispered into his hair. Her choices are hers alone. What matters is that you're alive. We are alive. and we're going to survive this." His sobs softened, the fight draining out of him until he sagged against me, breathing ragged but steadier. For a long moment, we stayed like that, two people bound by blood, both scarred by betrayal, clinging to each other as if we were the last solid ground left. When he finally pulled back, his jaw was set, eyes red but resolute. "Then we'll face her together. No more running from the truth." I nodded, pressing my palm against his cheek. His strength was returning, and with it, mine. Sophie hadn't just tried to kill us, she had tried to sever the bond between mother and son, and that she would never succeed in. The door opened, Rosa's figure framed by the harsh hallway light. "It's time," she said simply, and as Evan rose beside me, his hand gripping mine, I knew the moment had come to confront Sophie with everything she had taken and everything she would never destroy. The interrogation room felt even smaller when Rosa laid the vial on the table. Sophie's eyes locked onto it, and I saw the last bit of composure slip from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only the sound of shallow, uneven breaths. "You know what this is," Rosa said quietly. "We traced it, purchased through an online forum that deals in restricted chemicals. Payment routed through an account linked directly to you." Sophie shook her head at first. Slow, mechanical. "That's not true. You're trying to trap me. I bought vitamins. That's all." Rosa didn't flinch. "Say that again after I show you the invoice." She slid another sheet across the table, the line of transaction codes highlighted in yellow. "Do you still want to claim these are supplements?" The silence stretched until it snapped. Sophie buried her face in her hands, shoulders heaving. "Fine," she muttered. "Yes, I bought it." "Are you happy now?" Her voice was sharp, but it quivered, and beneath it I heard something more dangerous than fear, resentment. She dropped her hands and glared across the table, her eyes glassy but hard. "Do you know what it's like living under someone else's thumb? To smile, to serve, to play the perfect wife while everything is decided for you. Marina controls everything, every cent, every house, every future, and Evan. He was blind to it. I was supposed to sit there and watch while my life hung on the whims of a woman who never thought I was good enough." I bit the inside of my cheek, forcing myself to stay silent. Rosa only leaned closer. "So you decided poison was the answer?" Sophie's laugh was short and bitter. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. I just wanted Evan weaker, more dependent. I thought if he looked fragile enough, maybe Marina would finally step aside. Maybe the inheritance would come sooner. I didn't mean for it to," her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. Evan," watching through the glass beside me, let out a strangled sound. His palm slammed against the barrier, and his breath fogged the pain. He whispered, "Weaker. She wanted me weaker." The disbelief in his voice was sharper than anger. Inside the room, Sophie lowered her eyes, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I just wanted freedom. Do you understand that freedom from depending on smiles and favors? I was so close. And then Marina started talking about giving it all away to charity, to strangers. Do you know what that felt like? Everything slipping through my fingers." Rosa's tone didn't soften. It felt like entitlement, and entitlement drove you to arsenic. Sophie recoiled as though struck, her tears spilling freely now. She folded in on herself, voice dropping to a whisper. "I only wanted a future, not a grave." But as the words hung in the air, even she seemed to hear their hollowness. The monitors in the observation room ticked softly, the only sound that could follow such a confession. Evan sank into the chair beside me, his face pale, his voice breaking as he whispered. She was willing to bury us both for a future she thought she deserved. And as Rosa pushed the signed statement toward Sophie, I knew we were closer to the end, but the deepest wounds had only just begun to bleed. The headline hit Before sunrise, Seattle woman arrested for poisoning husband. By mid-morning, it was plastered across every news site, echoed on radios in taxis, scrolling on televisions in shop windows. Sophie's face, once framed in family portraits, now stared back at us from a police mugshot, eyes red, hair wild. The word poison blaring underneath. Evan and I watched from the kitchen table, the muted TV flickering above a cold pot of coffee. His hand trembled as he switched the remote off. "They know everything," he whispered. "The board, my colleagues, Ava's teachers. Everyone knows." I wanted to tell him the storm would pass, but that would have been a lie. Scandal never just passed, it lingered. Tainted, reshaped reputations. His fintech firm moved quickly, issuing a statement that Evan was on leave for health reasons. But the market responded anyway. Stock prices tumbled, investors demanded clarity, and whispers of negligence circulated. It didn't matter that he was the victim. Shadows clung to victims too. My world, strangely, shifted in the opposite direction. Journalists dug into my perfume brand, not to tarnish it, but to reframe it. Articles praised the resilient founder, the woman who had survived betrayal in her own family. Customers, once hesitant about luxury goods in a tightening economy, began buying in solidarity. Sales doubled within days, not because of the product, but because sympathy sells as much as scent. I took no pride in it. Each order felt heavy, a reminder that our private hell had become someone else's headline. The hardest blow came with Ava. She was only 6, too young to understand the magnitude, but old enough to know her mother was suddenly gone. Child Services made the call swiftly until custody could be determined. She would stay with Sophie's sister in Tacoma. The night we learned, Evan folded in on himself, sitting in the living room with his head in his hands. "She thinks I'm sick," he murmured. "She thinks her dad's too weak to fight for her, and now she's with people who'll tell her their own version of this story." I sat beside him, placing my hand over his. "Then we fight harder, not with poison or lies, but with what we still have left. Ava deserves a future untouched by Sophie's choices." He lifted his head, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "How do we protect her from this when it's everywhere? When kids will whisper about her mother in school?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I promise you, Evan, her story won't end like this. Not if I have any strength left." He nodded, though doubt still clouded his expression. The house fell silent again, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. That night, I sat at my desk, drafting new documents with Mr. Graydon. Not just about inheritance, but about Ava's guardianship, her education, her path forward. I vowed that my granddaughter would never be left vulnerable to the greed that had nearly destroyed us. My perfume brand could be more than business. It could become her safety net, her shield. Every clause I signed felt like a stitch, closing wounds that might otherwise bleed for generations. But as the ink dried, I knew that paperwork alone could not mend the heart. The city now carried our shame on its front pages, our names whispered in boardrooms and grocery stores alike. And tomorrow, Evan and I would have to walk into that world together, carrying scars no headline could capture. Mr. Graydon's office was quiet. The only sound the rustle of papers as he slid the new draft of my will across the desk. The words on the page were dense with legal precision, yet each line felt like a small rebellion against the nightmare Sophie had tried to weave around us. No loopholes, no clauses that could be twisted into motives for greed. Safeguards had been sewn into every corner: trustees, staggered access, ironclad restrictions. But this time, I had added something more. A portion of my estate would go to a fund supporting survivors of domestic poisoning and coercive control. It sounded almost strange when I said it aloud, But the lawyer nodded gravely, as if he understood exactly what it meant. Too many victims never had a chance to be believed, never had the resources to break free. My fortune could not erase what Evan and I had endured, but it could shield others before it was too late. Evan sat beside me, his tie loosened, fatigue still written across his face. Yet when I asked him again if he was sure, he reached over and set his hand on mine. "It's right. Mom, you're turning what almost destroyed us into something that might save someone else. That's the only way this ends with meaning." I searched his face for hesitation, but saw only quiet resolve. For weeks, he had lived in the shadow of betrayal, but now there was a steadiness in him, a decision to walk forward instead of back. "Mr. Graydon tapped the signature line. My hand trembled for a moment before the pen met the paper. The ink bled into the page, final and irreversible. I signed not just for myself, but for every silent victim who had ever swallowed something bitter and wondered if love could really taste like poison. News of Sophie's case continued to swirl outside. The prosecutors had offered her a plea deal. She would admit guilt to avoid a long trial that would drag Ava into the spotlight. Sentencing loomed in the weeks ahead. I tried not to follow every update, but the words still found me in headlines and whispers. They no longer filled me with rage, only sorrow. When we left the office, Evan walked me to the car. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight of the future settle more gently on my shoulders. "My daughter will grow up knowing," Evan said quietly, opening the door for me, "that her grandmother used her strength to protect others, not just her own." His words cut through me. Soft and healing, I touched his arm, grateful beyond language. "Legacy isn't what you leave in banks," I said. "It's what you leave in people, and in protections that no one can poison." As we drove away, the city lights flickered against the horizon, and I felt the faint stirrings of peace at last. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Reporters clustered along the back wall like crows waiting to pick apart a carcass. Sophie sat at the defense table, her hair pulled back too tightly, lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't cried since the day of her arrest, and she didn't now. The judge read the sentence, 15 years without parole, and Sophie's face didn't crack. Not a tear, not a flicker of regret, just that cold, distant stare as though we were the ones on trial. Not her. Evan's hand tightened on mine. I felt the tremor running through him. Though his posture was steady, he didn't look at her, and neither did I. She had already taken too much of our gaze, our energy, our lives. Instead, I focused on Rosa, seated 2 rows ahead, her sharp eyes softer now. When the gavel struck and the case was closed, I rose and crossed to her. "Thank you," I whispered, pulling her into an embrace. She stiffened for only a second before returning it. "You saved us." Her reply was simple. "You saved yourself by listening." Outside, the world was waiting, cameras flashing. Questions shouted. I gave no comment, no pause. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about survival. Evan and I slipped into the car, the roar of the crowd fading behind us. For the first time in months, silence felt like a gift. That evening, the city glowed under a sky painted in streaks of gold and violet. Evan and I stepped onto the balcony of my apartment, a place that had once been a retreat and later a refuge. The air was crisp, and below us, the world moved on, cars rushing, voices carrying, life indifferent to the storms that had broken us. Evan leaned on the railing, his profile caught in the dying light. His face was leaner now, marked by strain, but there was strength in the set of his jaw. "I don't know how to start again," he admitted. His voice was low, but it didn't tremble. "I feel like everything I believed about love is gone." I placed my hand over his. the warmth of his skin grounding me. Not gone, I said softly. Changed. Love protects, but with open eyes. Love isn't blind trust. Evan, it's trust tested. Trust proven. He turned to me then. And for the first time since the ordeal began, I saw a trace of peace in his eyes. Not joy yet, but the fragile outline of something that might one day grow into it. He squeezed my hand, and together we watched the sun dip lower, painting the horizon in fire before fading into dusk. I thought of Sophie, her whispers in the hospital room, her laugh that once seemed so genuine, her hand in mine when I first called her daughter. I thought of the poison laced into broth and tinctures, of how close we had come to losing everything. And I thought of how, in the end, it wasn't vengeance that saved us, but vigilance, evidence, proof, love that refused to look away. Evan rested his head briefly against mine. We're still here, he murmured. Yes, I said, my voice steady. And sometimes, survival itself is the sweetest revenge. The city lights blinked awake below us, the night taking shape. Hand in hand, we stood together, not as victims, but as survivors who had stared down betrayal and chosen to keep living. Our scars would remain, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of danger, of endurance, of love that refused to die. And as the last line of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, I knew our story wasn't ending here. It was beginning again, written in truth rather than illusion. Title thumb. Title. My daughter-in-law mistakenly sent my son's afternoon snack. What I found inside left me frozen. Thumbnail, my daughter-in-law sent my son's afternoon snack by mistake. A classmate turned pale. Take him to the hospital now, or he'll die. What I found inside left me frozen. Description. I lived through betrayal inside my own family, but I also discovered the strength to protect what matters most. This story is not just mine, it could be yours too. Stay until the end, because every moment counts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you've ever felt the weight of betrayal and the power of survival. Historias de vida, historias de venganza, historias que inspiran, historia conmovedora, historias reales. Título. Mi nuera me envió por error el refrigerio de mi hijo. Lo que encontré dentro me dejó helada. Miniatura. Mi nuera me envió por error el refrigerio de mi hijo. Un compañero palideció. Llévalo al hospital ahora, o morirá. Lo que encontré dentro me dejó helada. Descripción. Viví una traición dentro de mi propia familia, pero también descubrí la fuerza para proteger lo que más importa. Esta historia no es solo mía. Podría ser la tuya también. Quédate hasta el final, porque cada momento cuenta. No olvides dar me gusta, suscribirte y compartir si alguna vez has sentido el peso de la traición y el poder de la supervivencia. Historias de vida, historias de venganza, historias que inspiran, historia conmovedora, historias reales.